Thank you very much, everybody. Sorry for the technical glitch, but it happened. And thank you very much for your patience. Alem, you are set to go.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Asafa. I am residing in Houston, like Asafa said. Sorry for all this inconvenience. I'm with WSP. First thing I would like to say, the material and the content presented here is my responsibility only and doesn't really include the company WSP. So that's a disclaimer. Let me say briefly give you a background about the work I did here. I have been involved in flood studies for over 30 years, so that interests me, first thing. And here in Houston, we have hit by flood event, big ones. So I have firsthand experience when people in other countries get flooded. It touched me too as a professional and as a human being. And I started working on developing a rainfall runoff model before the 2020 flood to get a forecast model for the Abbay Basin. Abbay Basin could be utilized for various reasons. So when the 2020 flood hit, okay, this is a good opportunity to use the model I started working on and really do some high-level analysis of the study. So with this background, let's go to the next slide, please. I'll give you overview of the flood damage in Sudan, very high-level overview, and I'll talk about serious models and modeling with tools that can be used to analyze either flooding or reservoir simulation. Let's go to the next slide. In 2020, like all of you know, there is a big law of rain in the Ethiopian highlands and generally in the equatorial area also in Africa, tributary of the White Nile and the Blue Nile basins. And that really created a lot of runoff in the basin and got flooded. According to the report by Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, this is a report issued on September 10th. Over 500,000 people were affected. More than 111,000 houses were either destroyed or damaged. The flood also damaged several hectares of land, so on and so on. This gives you the picture, high-level pictures, as the damage was really extensive. This is not really a complete picture. Hopefully in Sudan, the authorities have issued, damage assessment, but I don't have any access. But this is just, a tip of the iceberg of the information I got, and to give you a very high-level information of the damage caused. Please, next slide. Pictures say a lot of words. When you see a man standing in the flooded water up to his above his knee, that tells you how extensive the damage is. There are houses behind, and also the bottom picture, the right bottom picture also tells you, there is water all over around the houses. This is generally in Sudan. It's not necessarily from the Blue Nile source. And just to give you a high-level overview of really the damage done in 2020. Please, next slide. This is the same thing. You see the houses built in the middle of the reservoirs. That's what it looked like. So the lady also is trying to swim out by, holding her valuable belonging not to get wet or lost. And this really gives you a very broad picture of the damage, the flood damage caused in Sudan in 2020. Next slide, please. Now let's come to the flows recorded in Alem gauging station, which is really across downstream of the GERD, close to the Sudan-Ethiopian border. If you see historically, there are high flows recorded in that by that gauging station. The most recent being 2020, 88, 2006, 98, 2001, 2000. All these are very high flows. I mean, the highest being 2020, 11,000 CFS. From my research and rating data I did from the hydraulics of the river, approximately when you get, 6,700 to 700 CMS, cubic meter per second, flooding commences in Sudan. That means the water gets out of the river bank and start flooding the surrounding area. So those years, somewhere in the Blue Nile, an area is flooded. I don't have really, I don't live in the area. I don't have really a very accurate picture where and or what location the water gets out, but this gives you through a general picture. As engineers, hydrologists, we do analysis, statistical analysis, and determine really what's the frequency of occurrence, things like that. Let's go to the next slide and show you the analysis I did. This is a frequency analysis using data, 95 years of data from LDAM gauging station, stream flow record. I try to use different distribution, and this is a picture you see. The red line you see is about 600, 500, the horizontal red line, 600, 500 cubic meter per second flow. So that corresponds to the exceedance probability as a x-axis between 0.5 and 1. This means it's a between 2-year and 10-year event. So if you look at the 7,000 CFS, it's close to a 10-year event. The exceedance probability is 0.1, and that's usually referred to in a flood profession as a 10-year event. That means the probability occurrence of that kind of magnitude flood in any given year is 10%. What is the probability of getting this much flow in the next 10 years? If you determine that one, the probability of success, what we call it in statistics, is about 70%. So there is a 70% chance a magnitude of flood 7,000 cubic meter per second will occur in the next 10 years. That's very, very high probability. The 2020 value is not on this graph. I'll show the next graph, please. Next slide. You see the left upper corner above, close to the 11,000 CMS, cubic meter per second. On the y-axis, you see a triangle dots there. That's the 2020 flood. It's within the bounds of error. That's the green dotted line you see as a 5% in the 95% confidence interval. So the 2020 flood, based on the LDAM gauge record, is above a 100-year event. Keep in mind that one, the 100-year event, and we'll discuss later on how GERD would have really mitigated this flow and saved Sudan from flooding. Next slide, please. Usually, we humans, we live close to the river. That's how civilization starts. And people got flooded because they are living in a floodplain. It's a natural course of the river. So one thing is, I mean, if you don't live in the floodplain, you don't get flooded, but that's not really possible because humans are already there. Try to avoid it if you can. If not, then you have to mitigate the consequence of flooding. One of the various methods are you build higher of the inundation elevation. That's really true in especially coastal area. If you live in coastal area, Florida, Galveston, you see houses built very high to above the wave height, or you increase the capacity of the conveyance system, contains the flow within the bank, the river bank. So, so that the water really gets out into the adjacent area. So that require building either improving the capacity of the channel or building a levee so that it can contain the flow. The other mitigation measure is detain and release the flow slowly. That require building dams. And if we cannot do all of that, develop a warning system so that people can get out at least. That's mostly what's protection in Sudan is like the presentation done by Mohammed last time. Next time, please. Next slide, please. We have several suites of models to really analyze and determine or predict beforehand, or develop, projects that could really mitigate this flow. You don't go and really build dams without really making analysis or determination first, your protection or how you might really impact the damage of flooding before it happens. So we have a hydrology model, which is HMS. These are all Army Corps of Engineers models. They are free, available to download. And I've been working on this model for several years. That's what I'm familiar with. And they are updated frequently. And there is a lot of material if anyone wants to learn about these models. So the other one is a reservoir simulation model, RES-SIMS, and the other one is river analysis model, which we usually call HEC-RAS. And the last one is FIA, this flood impact analysis model. All these models will give you a very good picture of using for the analysis. Keep in mind, I'm using modeling tools. I will introduce at least 3 of them later on in my presentation. Next slide, please. To do that one, you need data sources. When I embarked on this project, I didn't have any data source, so I needed DM, digital elevation model, to delineate drainage area. There are some drainage areas really developed for the Nile Basin, but I needed somehow control on the drainage area size, the delineation, and to develop, watershed parameters. So I started from scratch. So the data source I used was the Shutter Radio Topography Mission, DEM data available in open source. It has 30-meter horizontal resolution to delineate drainage area boundary. And we need also rainfall data. There are several rainfall data out there. Most of you are familiar with that one. TREM is one of them. The other one is GPM. The other one is CRISP. That's the climate hazard group, infrared precipitation with station data. There is some adjustment with on-ground station data on that one. That's mostly what's used for African conditions. And you need also soil information to develop hydrology models. The soil information is graciously provided by Belletta et al. They provide me the shapefile, and I'm thankful for that cooperation. Next slide, please. This is a watershed delineation I come up with. The Abbay Basin is 174,530 kilometers square. You might see a different drainage area number depending on the report you cited, but this is at the GERD location, and it matches the outside boundary closely with others. So the elevation range from the mountain, about 4,000 meters, to the Sudan lowland area, about 400 meters above sea level. So I think most of you are familiar with this one. Let's go to the next slide. This is also to show you once the water gets into the Sudan, very flat topography, the drainage, the natural topography. Then once the water gets out of the banks of the river, it flows freely and damage agricultural areas, neighborhood, things like that. So it's not like deep in the valleys of the Nile Basin, the Nile River in the Ethiopian highland. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a HEC-RAS model setup from the mouth of Lake Tana up to the Rosaris reservoir on downstream end. I use this one to develop a routing parameters for the hydrology model. It's a lot of work, but somebody has to do it. Unfortunately, I don't have any help. This is my personal project, so I did all of it by myself with consultation with on some things I lack technically with my colleagues and friends. Next slide, please. This is a channel profile for Abbay Basin. When you see the upstream part is very steep, very steep slope, and it goes down the GERD. You see on the down, close to the bottom of the screen. This is a perfect place to put a flood control reservoir. GERD is not designed for flood control purposes. It's mainly purposes hydro to generate power, but this is a classic example of a location of a flood control reservoir before it gets into the flat valley and where it's really deep into the valleys of the Nile Basin. That's the cross section you see on the top. It's approximately about from 900 to 600, 300 meters deep. So you can really store a lot of water in that valley and release it slowly for downstream. Next slide, please. There is this is a flood flow showing downstream of the GERD. On the top left corner, you see Rosaris reservoir. That's a downstream on end of my model setup. So if you hover on the screen, I mean, you can play actually this how the particle moves and show you, yeah, the bottom. Go to left bottom. Yeah, hit that arrow. Little bit to the right. Yes, hit that one. Yep. Okay, you can stop it now. You got a picture of it. I mean, this you can visualize and really see how the water flows in the river channel. That's a floodplain width. I mean, if inundation occurs, so you can evaluate, you know, how far the water goes into the adjacent area. Next slide, please. Again, this is the same thing showing different views. You don't have to play it now, just I'll talk to save some time. The data from the DM, from the shelter recovery is very coarse. It's not suitable for hydraulic modeling, but that's the data we have. And for real accurate modeling, there needs to be some high resolution survey to discover, but this gives you a general idea of the channel flow, the flow in the river banks. So next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. This is the same thing showing that one again. You don't have to play it. I mean, let's save time since we started late. And this is, I mean, to show you on the left-hand side, you see the river bed. There is a kink there and the constriction. The shuttle data did not pick it up very well. So actually, I have to manipulate the DEM in order for the flow to pass. So the right-hand side, the one that shows the particle size, shows you how the water in that area flows. I don't think that's accurate representation. So if one needs to be, you can play now to see, I mean, how the flow. Yeah, looks like there is an island, there is overflow on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side from the screen, you see from Google Earth. This gives you a good visualization of, especially on the two-dimensional model, how the flood water flows in the adjacent area. Next slide, please. Well, let's back to 2020 rain event. I mean, these are CHIPS data, mainly from the radar information, maybe measurement from the cloud. So it has its own limitation, but it's open source, it's available. You don't have to really correspond several emails of authorities to get you the data, which you may not get. In my situation, in Ethiopian situation, I don't know why releasing data is that really high sensitive, but that's entirely another matter. So if you see the rainfall band from Nakkant, I'm sure all of you are familiar with that it is. And sorry, to Deborah Brand, that's the wettest area. I think the rainfall amount from July to September is about 3,000 millimeters. There are some embedded bias and errors on this one, but it'll give you the big picture of really how much the rainfall distribution is in the watershed. In the valleys where the GERD is, where the yellow highlights, we didn't get much rain. Even the cumulative rain is about 80 millimeters. So if drought occurs in Ethiopia, it starts here. I mean, I know downstream countries call about drought mitigation, but it starts in the Ethiopian highlands. So when rain fails and the crop pattern completely decimates because you don't have any backup information. I use information as input for my hydrology model. I'll show you some of the results later on. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the soil information of the watershed. I mean, That's one of the parameters needed, how much really infiltration and losses are in the soil. Next slide, please. After putting all that, you get HMS model, hydrologic model simulation. This is a drainage area, and they're routed through the stream reservoirs, and at the end, you have an outlet. So I modeled it with and without GERD and see the effect of the GERD reservoir as stand in 2020. In 2020, the elevation for the block was about, the central block is 560 meters. And with the storage area curve evaluation, how would behave? That was one of the question I was trying to answer. Mind you, this is not a calibrated model. And it doesn't give you exact number, but it gives you the behavior of the watershed with and without GERD. Next slide, please. This is the hydrograph. You see the elevation of the reservoir on the top one, the blue line, and the bottom you see flows with and without GERD. Like I said, this is not calibrated yet because we need stream gauge information flow at various locations to have really a very successful calibrated model that could be used even for several purposes. As you can see, even though it's passing the flow downstream, once it overtops, it really mitigates by some amount, in this case by about 2000 CFA. So even though GERD is not completed, the law of runoff is generated from the system, still the reservoir has some impacted, lessening the flooding in the downstream location, in this case in the Sudan. So next slide, please. This is a Abbay watershed. In order to have a successful calibration, we need to do for each big watershed, for example, calibrate the data separately, ballast separately, then you can have really probably a model that could be utilized for even for operation purposes. I mean, for example, right now they are building the dam, but they don't know how much flow is coming to the system. They are also really very concerned. I mean, while the construction going on, with the flow generated from the watershed overtops. So if we have a calibrated model, you can play a scenario analysis. Also, there's a later response from the watershed. It doesn't get it within all of them at the same time. So it rains in different areas. If you have a very accurate or a very good estimate of the rainfall amount in various watershed, you can run the model, run the hydrology model first, then route it through your reservoir and see the rate of rise while really construction is going on. And you can have really a sense whether that might overtops or not. I think we need to get into that kind of high-level analysis in the future. And now we have time, especially once operation started, to develop that kind of model. But we need really a very good data source, both rainfall and stream gauge station data. The only stream gauging station we have that really collects flow from the entire watershed, L-time gauging station. I think once the reservoir is built, you probably don't have any other source in the future unless, because that's controlled by the reservoir outflow. So I think this is something that the Ethiopian government needs to really take it very seriously and develop a gauging station in the upstream of the watershed and really develop available that data so that this kind of simulation can be really assist in operation of the reservoir in the future or for other purposes. Next slide, please. Well, the other question is the GERD has not been completed. We all know that, but if it had been completed 2020, could have prevented flooding from Blue Nile. In this case, I think it won't prevent from a White Nile or Atbara River, but if your source of flow, 70% is coming from one stream, if you really reduce that one, you probably eliminate flooding downstream. This is a huge thing, especially the 2020 flood is a 1% event. And if protects or prevents or reduce that kind of magnitude of flood, most likely you may not get that kind of flood in the future for the next 50, 60 years. Even it comes, you have a reservoir that could really mitigate the flooding impact. But it depends on how the reservoir is operated. If the reservoir is full to the max, it doesn't have any impact. Maybe it might really attenuate the flow slightly, but it may not have that impact. But from the statement made by Ethiopian authorities, normal operation is from, they try to keep the reservoir between 625 and 640 meter, minimum elevation at 610. That means if the reservoir is at 625 at the onset of reservoir, so you have a lot of volume to store that water. My question was, is there enough volume, depending how much you release downstream? So I applied, reservoir simulation model to see this one. And as you can see, we can go to the next slide and see the result of that simulation analysis. And just to give you an overall view of reservoir simulation, I think most of you are familiar with that, with this equation. This is solving a simple mass balance equation. Inflow minus outflow minus losses is the storage in the reservoir. But it gets a little bit complicated or complex depending on what kind of rule curve we use. So it's solving this kind of equation in various sequence. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is possible GERD operation rule curve. You start January, February, March at 610 or 625. And when the onset of reservoir is, you gradually increase and build up to 640, depending on if we have enough flow. Then due to power operation or downstream release, the reservoir level declines again and up to December. This is a hypothetical rule curve that might be applied depending on the operation of the reservoir. It doesn't necessarily be like this, but it will really bounce in up and down along either the blue line or the orange line curve. Let's go to the next slide. This is also to show you, you have a guide curve depending on how much flow coming in. You can set either minimum release or maximum release or release due to power supply. So the top picture shows you the guide curve. Then if the reservoir is below the guide curve, it releases the minimum. Then once it reaches at the guide curve, then it starts releasing what's really coming in. The coming inflow passes. So if there is excess, it's stored. So that's how most of the reservoir operation is really done. And that's how the model and the simulation works. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the inflow at LDAM gating station. I apply this one upstream of the inflow location, but since the storage, there is only storage about 4.5 BCM. I adjusted that one in order to not double count during my analysis. 1988 inflow LDAM is also shown. It's the highest. The 2020, it came late in September. Actually, they have double peak in August also, above 8,000 CFS. I think all this time it receded and come back again based on the rainfall amount in the watershed. Let's go to the next slide. I set the outflow to a certain level and run for two conditions. The inflow is shown in gray, and the outflow is shown in blue and orange. This is a scenario analysis, not necessarily to to not necessarily the operation of the reservoir is featured by Ethiopian government. So the blue line is reservoir is set at the initial condition of set 610 meter, and the orange line is 625 meter. So the inflow, the difference you see between the 2020, the gray line, and either the orange or the blue line is the volume. So does the reservoir has capacity to store all this water and release immediately? These releases could be due to power operation or just downstream releases. I limit the maximum to 6,000 CFS, not cause downstream flooding. That's the cardinal rule. When you operate a reservoir, you shouldn't really make it worse than before the project was implemented. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes that's not. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the result in terms of, level of reservoir. The blue line, like I said, starts at 610. You have inflow coming in, your outflow stays. The difference between is stored. And the orange line, the reservoir starts 625, then inflow minus outflow minus losses. I didn't really consider any kind of evaporation or seepage losses. In this case, this is a short duration. The data was from June to September. And the reservoir never reached the maximum capacity of the reservoir, which is about 640. So if GERD was completed and operated as really stated in this presentation, Sudan would have been saved from the devastating flooding of 2020. Keep in mind, this is only from the flooding source of only Abbay River. There might be other flooding sources from other streams, which GERD could not protect because it was not online in those rivers, banks or channels. Let's go to the next slide, please. In conclusion, in 2020, GERD reduced or delayed the peak flow by a certain amount in my uncalibrated model by about 2,000 CFS. If that had been completed, Sudan would have been really saved from the catastrophic flooding of 2020. Also, I put a very short article on Borkana, Grand Ethiopian Reservoir Dam, salvation to flooding in Sudan. Most of this presentation content is included in that one. You can check out that also. Thank you very much. Any questions? Next slide, please. Yep, I'm done. Sorry for the inconvenience, but I try to manage with the time constraint we have and hopefully give you overall picture of my work.
Thank you, Alem. This is a highly technical and wonderful presentation. If he was paid as a consultant for this work, it would have costed a lot of money. This is a great contribution to spend his time and develop this kind of simulation model which can be used for the operation of the dam in the future. So if you have questions, raise your hand, or if you don't want to speak, you can send in the questions through the chat. Okay, Dr. Admasu, unmute yourself. Dr. Admasu, you are mute.
Yes, I am unmuted now. So I think this forum is to be liked by many.
You are muted. You are muted again.
Thank you, Dr. Osano. What I am commenting on is on the forum itself. It's a very useful contribution you are making. At least we are keeping meeting on such important issues from time to time. And I encourage you to keep on. Next to that, I have a question. to Dr. Alem. If we go back to the flood magnitude against return period plot, I will have the question there.
Do you want to see the slide?
Yes.
Yeah. Those are the numbers. The next slide is a graph that shows the frequency analysis.
Yes, the frequency analysis where you have a yellow, a blue curve probably. And also, yes, this one. When I see the plot is here as a right side, as the top part of the graph, you have the triangular dots representing the actual observation. And you have also the model showing you in blue, bounded by green ones. According to my judgment, this model is not the right one to project whatever those triangular plots are telling us. So if we follow or just try to use French curve rather than computed values, or this will be much more steeper than assumed by the model you have. Would you comment on that, or did I misunderstand you, or?
Yeah, sure. Can I answer the question now or wait later on?
Go ahead.
Okay. I tried several distributions and if you go to the previous graph, let's go to the previous graph, Dr. Asafa.
Okay.
One more up. Yes. This distribution is log 10 normal distribution. As you know, we have several type of distribution to see which distribution really fits your data good. Some you have some outliers. The green dotted line are the 95% and 5% confidence interval. And most of the data you have here is really within that bound. So from my previous work in frequency analysis, this is, very good fit. Other distribution may not fit it very well. If you go to the next slide now, I added the 2020 number. That's a little bit outside of the green dotted line, outside the bound of 95 and 5% confidence interval. If you do 90%, 10% interval, that might be encompassed, but it's not a bad fit. There might be other model fits that might be suitable for this one, but overall, it gives you a very good indication your return period is above 1%. So that's the message I'm trying to project. But if you are trying to use this one for other purposes, maybe I'll try different distribution like you suggested and develop an equation, the alpha, the beta, all those parameters that really comes with the distribution.
Next question, please. Let's see. Asafa, can you take us back?
Okay.
All right. Questions?
Yeah, Balata.
I don't see Balata. Balata raised his hand?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Balata.
Okay, sorry, thank you. You heard me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adam. I think it is really a good effort to see the different positive impact of GERD with a quantitative matter. So yes, most of us are already told a lot of time, flood is controlled by GERD, but such quantitative data is more supportive that idea. So it is a good effort, and it is good also to make it more comfortable for the discussions and uses. With this general idea, I think I will have 2 or 3 suggestions for the updating of the results, because since Dr. Alem gave us, it is a non-calibrated model, so now we are not reliable to the numbers because of that, the calibration. But my suggestion was, my suggestion will be that it is good to have a possibility to calibrating. I think, Dr. Alem, you, as I see, you have a data from LDEM stations. So if there is LDEM stations, so I think it is good to calibrating your model with LDEM stations without GERD. Then you can superimpose GERD. It will give a perfect result for that process. Second, when I see your rule curve assumptions, I think your rule curve assumptions are merely working with this this Gregorian calendar, this time calendar based, but if you make it with the hydrological calendar, and in most of the case, what we are expecting is the lower level is reached at the end of the hydrological year. That means at June. So what was expected route is at June, it starts to at the lower end, that's 625. Then all operating are gone up, maybe as you mentioned, in September and October, it's become high, and it is again with through operation down to 625 again to the next June. In that way, if you are adjusting that rule curve with this kind of adjustment, it also gives you more comprehensive things. Third, maybe my suggestion is that your suggestion for this the operation with 6,000 CMs. I think your suggestion seems that operation above 6,000 CMS may be difficult for the downstream, but it may not be. So I think before calibration and finalizing the number, it's better to avoiding such kind of fixed number suggestion. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, can I comment or wait for another?
Go ahead, comment.
All right, thank you for your suggestion, Dr. Balata. Yeah, the calibration, normally big size watershed like that, it's very difficult to get a very good calibration with one gauging station. What we normally do, here I am spoiled, I go on the site, any site in the US, download data, and rainfall adjusted information is there. So I have not one gauging station in a very small watershed, like even 1 square mile, sometimes I have 2 gauging stations. So in that way, it's very, very easier to calibrate. So normally we come from the upstreaming, then we go further downstream and really calibrate the various parameters. But with one gauging station for 174 kilometers square, that's really very difficult. I know there are gauging stations, at least 2. One, Tana, downstream of Tana, there is one. There is also another gauging station on the bridge on the main Nile. Also, there are gauging station tributaries. If those flows are available, it makes our life much, much, much easier. But those flow values, even though they are available, they are very, very difficult to get, or I'm not sure what the reason is. We requested actually through proper channel, and we were told it's a very sensitive issue. Personally, I don't get that. I mean, I think the Ethiopian government needs to rethink this data sharing policy, if there is one. That's one thing. So calibrating the entire Abbay Basin with one scale station, LDAM station, probably you may not get, I tried, but you cannot get a very good result. Your second comment on the roll curve, I agree with you. This is my hypothetical roll curve. I'm not sure how, since I don't have first-hand information, how the operation of the reservoir is really done. I made up this roll curve just to demonstrate my point. The other point you make about 6,000 CFS is if we are releasing more flow downstream, yes, you have more room to store, but I limit it to 6,000. Again, this is hypothetical. I put a caveat that this does not really show the policy of the Ethiopian government, being a little bit detached, what's really going on back in Ethiopia within the operation of the reservoir, what's planned. That's what I come up with, but I don't mean to suggest that you have to limit to 6,000 CFS, CMS, sorry, downstream. Sometimes you might even release 12, 15,000 cubic meter per second, depending on the hydrology of the season. In that case, close coordination with the downstream reservoir operator countries needs to occur. My fear is down the road, maybe 10 years, 15 years, due to climate change, the reservoir is full, close to full capacity. We get rainfall amount close to 2020. Then the Ethiopian government will be forced to release, open the Gator Reservoir, or through the emergency spillway. Without having all this discussion, Sudan will be drenched with flooding again. GERD, the Ethiopian government will be blamed in the news. We know how that cycle goes. So if we really develop a very good data, either rainfall amount or gauging station data, and calibrate and develop a forecast model and really give a warning system beforehand, everybody will be really benefit. I think that needs to be really very serious thought to that one. Thank you.
All right, one point I want to add, all our presentation and work stops in the Sudan. And now the second filling is going to start. If we simulate what the second filling is going to be and what's going to happen in the Sudan, we'll get some results. But the determining factor on success in downstream countries, it depends totally on the coordination between Sudan and Egypt. On Al Jazeera, Egyptians usually present the filling is going to harm Sudan. Yes, it will harm Sudan if all the flow passes to Egypt. That kind of modeling was for flood, water supply, because it is a matter of draining or filling a reservoir in the Sudan, they have to coordinate downstream from Sudan to Egypt. Otherwise, right after the second filling, there is a potential that Sudan will blame Ethiopia for lack of water, and Egypt also will blame Ethiopia for harming Sudan. So these modelings have to be continued from Sudan downstream by those parties in order to have a coordinated operation with the GERD. Any other questions or comments? All right, I think we're reaching to the end of the presentation. Asafpa, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, everybody. Let me be on video. Thank you very much, everybody, especially Alem, for making it early in the morning. Is that 7 o'clock when you start this morning? I think it should be very early over there, yeah. It's really quite extraordinary for all of you to come that early here in the US and that late in Africa and also in Asia and in Australia. I've seen Katama from Australia. So we are really people joining us from different places. This is really a very important forum. We would like to continue. Please make sure that you also share this announcement for everybody. We will be posting the video and the PowerPoint upon approval of Alem on our forum website, and then you can actually reach it. And we will announce upcoming June 30th presentation by Dr. Sam Morris. Please be open to contact me or Candice if you like to have someone to talk about GERD, Nile, or any other transboundary water image, because this is an open forum, this is a scientific forum, and this is an academic institution where we entertain every point of view, every research result. It doesn't mean that we have a disclaimer. This is the presentation doesn't actually represent or is coming from the employer of the respective speaker. So this is personal opinion based on science and data. That's what we are trying to promote. So thank you very much again for coming, and we will send the next announcement soon. And again, we will see you hopefully on the June 30th on the next presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.